Darla was last week. Thank you very much for sharing that, and for our musicians as well. Thank you for the gift of music. So this is the first Sunday of Advent, and I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago that for some strange reason on the first Sunday of Advent we expect to hear, a little sweet story about Mary pregnant, on and on, but instead the first Sunday of Advent there's always a story about the ending of the world. And that kind of, it's teaching us something different. And part of what we know is that the people in Jesus' time, they lived in a world that was a lot like our world. It was just filled with war and filled with trauma. And particularly they had seen their capital, Jerusalem, sacked, and the Roman Empire was, had just dominated folks. And it was a time of really massive suffering. And so they got to a point where, after the time of Christ, people immediately expected that Jesus would come back and he would restore the world and things would be this world of peace. And when it didn't happen, 60, 70 years later, about the time the Gospel of Matthew, which is our gospel, was written, people began to hope for something different. They began to hope that the world really would blow apart so that there could be this kind of new reign. So they didn't just come up with this, they kind of inherited it from the Jewish people. You see it all throughout the Old Testament, or what we call the Hebrew Bible, this hope that God will bring a new ruler, someone who will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And when this ruler did not come, they again, instead of thinking that God would send someone like Jesus to kind of transform this world, they began to think Jesus would come back and really take this world away and take us off to some other world, some new world. So we talk about that as kind of apocalyptic or eschatological thinking, and we all know, because all of us have relatives like this probably who consider themselves Christians, but their way of dealing with the world instead of trying to make this earth much better is to just prepare for this great day when the rapture will come and they will live with the chosen people in a totally different way of being, a totally different world. And that's what we hear kind of in our gospel lesson this morning. And it's a warning. Basically, the scripture talks about how before this world is taken away, it will get even worse. So you'll see maybe sort of like what you've got going on right now, where there's more refugees than any time in human history, and there's wars, it seems like, everywhere you turn, and there's divisiveness and fighting. And then it talks about how this new ruler will come and set things right. Jesus will come back. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together, one will be taken and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not left his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an expected hour. So I was home over Thanksgiving, home being Texas, and working on the sermon some. And my parents, my mom is 79, my dad is 86, and they have always been pretty liberal, open-minded people, and they lived through a lot of racial turmoil. My elementary school was actually integrated when I started first grade, and Mansfield, which is close to my city, Arlington, is the very last school district in this country to be desegregated. And so my parents always, I've never heard my parents say a derogatory term about a person of color. I've never heard my father say a derogatory word about a woman, never. And so the last few months have really been upsetting for them because they feel like there's been sort of a rollback in seeing kind of the racism and the xenophobia and a lot of what's been unleashed. So we were talking about that, and I was reflecting on the scripture, which is really about kind of the end of the world and a very difficult time and a dark time as you would have it. And so I asked my mother, because I'm trying to think about, one of the good things about being older, really older, is that you live through a lot. And so you kind of have a sense that things come and go, and there will be difficult times and then things. So I said to my mom, what is the worst time, the most difficult time, the most frightened you've ever been? And I thought she might bring up the Second World War. She was a little girl. She was born in 1937. They were near the end of the Depression. There was 11 kids. They lived on a farm, kind of lost the first farm. There were 8 girls and 3 boys. And of the boys, 2 of them were off fighting, and one of her brothers had been shot down. And she's told me before about her job as a little girl going to the mailbox and her parents wanting to hear if the brother had been found. And she remembers, you know, kind of the rationing and all that, but not real well. And then she was 8. It was her birthday, the day that the bomb over Hiroshima was dropped. But she said that wasn't the most frightening time because I was really too young to understand. And then I thought she might say when Kennedy was assassinated, because a lot of you have heard me talk about this. My mother worked for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. She set type. She was in the International Typographical Union before she went back and became an accountant. My father worked for the Dallas Times-Herald. And they were both at work, back and forth. They were at home when it happened. My mother had gone back to work that Friday night, expected to do the very important work that everybody who works in a newspaper at the time did on Friday nights in Texas, which was high school football scores. But instead, you know, through tears, trying to set the type and trying to get the paper out, and that whole week, all the news, and the sadness that they felt as people right there in the Fort Worth, Dallas area. But it wasn't that. She said the most frightened I have ever been, it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. She said, you were just a tiny baby, and actually I was just a day old, really, when it began, and just 2 weeks old when it ended. And she said, I was at home with you because I was on leave. And she said, and I just remember how frightened we were. She said, like we really thought that the end of the world might be here. You know, there were missiles, Soviet missiles, 90 miles off the coast in Cuba, aimed for the United States, and President Kennedy had said very clearly those are going away. And it was a very frightening time. And she talked about kind of what they had been warned to do, you know, how they had been really since the Bay of Pigs and an invasion earlier in '61, there had been this kind of word coming out from the government that you should be, you know, building your own bomb shelter. And there had some public fallout shelters had been constructed, and there were sirens that had been put up, and they would be tested, and people would practice in the schools doing the little duck and cover thing. They would duck under their desk, you know, and they would do that as if that was really going to save you, you know, from a nuclear warhead. And she said, and I remember I was at home, she said, and one of the printers came by. She said, the union shop, they call it a chapel, had its kind of own disability provision. It was called a mutual aid society. And everybody who was in the union would pitch in 50 cents or $1 a week, and that money would go to the person who couldn't work. That was my mother, and she was home with me. And she said, I remember the printer, one of them, and that's one of the days back in those days, when you were the person who worked at the newspaper, you knew the news before everybody else. You know, remember back in the days of 2 papers a day and all that morning and afternoon? She said, I remember one of the printers coming with my little, you know, dollar bills, and he was telling me, it's really grim. The president, what he has said, and if you don't have a bomb shelter, they really want you to put plastic over your windows and seal it off with tape. And my mother said, I remember thinking, you know, we only had one car and your father had it at work, and of course I was home with you and your brother. And she said, maybe because I'd seen the pictures of Hiroshima, I didn't really think plastic sheeting and tape would work. She said, I remember probably filling up some more pitchers with water, and I probably asked your dad to get more peanut butter or something like that. And I thought about that, you know, and it turns out not that many people did cover their windows with plastic sheets. And if you look at the pictures of Aleppo and you look what barrel bombs and vacuum bombs and cluster bombs can do, I really think a nuclear bomb couldn't, you know, sheets. And this is like a picture from the civil defense. I was kind of looking at it. I love the woman in the apron, but it says, you know, something like, you know, that families are encouraged to make their own bomb shelters with bricks and fill them with sand. You know, and I remember thinking, you know, that's kind of some ways the way we respond when we think things are coming apart. Now today, you know, we kind of think, well, we're more sophisticated than that. We wouldn't do that. But the reality is we have our own ways of trying to kind of hold back dark times or times when we feel afraid. And some of that has been coming out in different ways in kind of the rash of conspiracy theories that have been floating around in this election year. Sunday before the election, I was on a plane to go see my daughter in Columbus, and I stopped through Chicago, picked up a copy of the Chicago Tribune, and there was a great story. It was picked up from the LA Times, Some Dark Forces Behind the Spread of Conspiracy Theories. And the article was talking about just how, there's just never been so many conspiracy theories flying around, and that 41% of registered voters believe that Hillary Clinton won, that it was fixed, it would have been a combination of President Obama and the Muslim Brotherhood, and it went on to talk about that. And this was a very scholarly article. It's a very interesting article. They're quoting a lot of folks from the University of Chicago and UCLA and Columbia and United Kingdom about kind of what they've learned. And basically, there's certain people who are just very prone to buy into conspiracy theories, like people who are psychotic or paranoid, people who are very, very religious, who believe in angels and kind of crazy, certain kinds of people are more prone to it. But the reality is that everybody is prone to it. It talks about how, they would even come up, these scholars, they would make things up like fluorescent lights are a way of trying to control people that the government has come up with. And 11% of people would believe that. But they said, really, the right and the left, everybody can believe in conspiracy theories. The point is because it's a way of kind of making sense of life when it seems crazy. To paint all people who buy into conspiracy as crazy doesn't work, say the scholars who study such stuff. Most are people well within the bounds of normal mental health. When the world is a random place over which one has little control, believing in conspiracy theory offers assurance that there are people responsible for the distress one feels. And there are things you can do about those people. Put up yard signs, find fellow believers on the internet, build a bomb shelter. You don't feel helpless anymore, he said. Experiencing a loss of control can drive perfectly reasonable people to see patterns where none exist. In a series of experiments, social psychologists from Columbia and UCLA showed that when people were prompted to feel less powerful, they were more likely to discern objects embedded in fields of random patterns of dots. The need to be and feel in control is so strong that individuals will produce a pattern from noise to return to the world to a predictable state. And I have to admit, some of this, let's do a recount or let's do this or that, part of you, if, depending on who you voted for, there's a part of you that thinks, well, what if, only this many people voted for that person? Then maybe it makes you feel like the world's not as crazy as you thought it was. There's all kinds of things. This drive to make order out of chaos may explain why, after the terrorist attacks of September 11th, those who lived in and around New York City were more likely to embrace conspiracy theories than those who lived far away. Same for those who lived close to the nuclear reactor in Japan. It's like our way of putting plastic and duct tape around the world and trying to make ourselves safe and trying to feel like there is something that makes sense about this world, when often we look at the world and we think, what really makes sense here? And I tell you what, if someone had told me how your heart would break and how much stress it would be to have children, I guess I would have done it anyway, but I think I would have decided to invest in a lot of liquor. But I thought about it this morning. 4 years ago on Thanksgiving weekend, my daughter was a senior at Shawnee Mission East. And I'm sure she had come in late, and I'm sure it was stressful, but I remember waking up that morning and some of the other Shawnee Mission East parents to the text that 6 kids in Eden's class had been at the Sutherland farm, and they were involved in a big accident on ATVs. They'd been drinking. One of them was dead. One was critically injured. One was driving it. Of course, the young man who died was the favorite kid in the class, already had a soccer scholarship. I just remember that. And last night with Eden and her friends around the table, even in her close group, someone in prison, someone home from rehab, someone who's going to graduate early, someone who's trying to figure out, it is just so vulnerable to have kids, to love people. You think you can control things. You think you can eat right and exercise. But the mom at the high school who was a vegetarian and ran and did everything and died of cancer anyway. And left, 3 or 4 kids behind. You can't just seal the world off. Even if you want to, there's just no putting it in a box and making it be simple and easy. And that's kind of what Advent is about. It brings us up into this raw place, and it says to us, all your desire to try to keep it all contained, forget about that. Forget about that, because it's always being taken away from us. And instead, we come to this place where we've got 2 options as to how we want to live in it. And one of them is one of the options that you hear in various scriptures. And it's very much like the one we heard today, which is like build your own bunker and seal yourself off and be looking and watching it.
See, because there's crazy people, there's people around you. You got to watch for those people. You got to be looking for the enemy, and you just got to always be having your back and always thinking about how am I going to get out of this place so I can go off into the great glory land where God is going to have me and all my sweet people, and we're all going to be good. And the other message is a very different one. And it's a message that steps back from the scripture and looks at the whole of it. It starts with those stories in creation that tell us that this is an unbelievably gorgeous world. That this is a world where somehow we woke up. And what can you count on? What can you count on today? You can count on the sun in the sky holding us all together. You can count on rain that will come and feed the earth. You can count on people who love you and touch you with grace and care. You can count on the gift of maybe somehow coming into the world, even in the most desperate situations. And we know how it works. Little kids that grow up, this gorgeous, beautiful world, so radiant and incredible. And the scripture goes on, and it talks to us about what it means to protect this world, what it means to bring the slaves out of Egypt, what it means to do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with God, what it means to be like Jesus Christ, who said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has called me to preach good news to the poor and liberty to the captives and release to the slaves. It is this message that says, you know what you can do in the face of all the craziness, in the face of we don't know what's coming tomorrow? You can seize this day. You can choose this very day to stand up and to live in love, to touch your children with understanding and compassion, to speak up against anyone whose rights are threatened. That's exactly what Wissam Yarka is doing. One of the things I do, and this is my way of pushing back the darkness, is I collect people in my brain and who do the most amazing things, who live the way I want to live. And I just kind of recycle, I hold on to those people, I hold on to their witness. And Wissam Yarka, some of you may have heard this story. It's a very simple story on NPR that just keeps trying to keep the Syrian people in front of us. Keeps trying to say, don't forget, don't forget, don't forget, while you're all running around, that here are these people from whom the bombs are really raining upon. And this story last week was about eastern Aleppo, where Russians and Syrian are just raining down on the people. And Wissam is a teacher. He teaches there. He lives with his wife. They were pregnant. They just lost the baby. They're not sure if it was from all the stress or what. But the person started off talking about how there had been renewed strikes on schools and on hospitals. And they asked him if this increased bombing had brought daily life to a halt in the Syrian city. No, like even when a street is targeted, like 5 minutes later, life would go back to normal somehow. People who live day by day can't stay at home. They have to work. The students come even when there are shells falling. The reporter asked, what do you tell these young kids about the situation? Oh no, in fact, they are telling me they know better. Most of them have spent all of their life in this situation. So usually they would start at class, they would tell me what happened, who died, and how, in a very straightforward manner, like this is just, they're used to this life. The other day, a little girl in 7th grade, she told me that she couldn't finish her homework because her brother was killed. It was the same day he was killed, so I was surprised that she had come to school. This is how it happens here. The reporter asked him about his family and friends. They were all in Turkey. Wife decided to stay in eastern Aleppo. It's a duty. There are children here. There are young people who need education to go on. If all people who have already finished their study ran away, there would be no more life here, only death, only war. So I was in Saudi Arabia. I used to teach at university. It was comfortable there, but I didn't feel okay. I felt that there was something I should be doing, and I wasn't. You know, our listeners here, they hear day after day about the bleak and terrible situation in Aleppo. What is your best hope at this point? No idea. Like as for me, I wanted to be here no matter what. Maybe we will be killed today, tomorrow, no big difference. So I prefer to die here doing my duty. So I don't have a lot of hopes about the future. What I care about is the present. That's all that matters. And that's the other example. That's the other example about standing up every day, and living as if God's grace and mercy and peace and compassion were just flowing out of you, and deciding in every day to offer that up. And then another story about Tinsley, Georgia. Some of you may have heard different stories about this most remarkable man. He lives in Plattsburgh, New York. He came here from Bhutan. He was a refugee of Tibetan ancestry, and so they were very oppressed by the Chinese. So he came to the United States and became a naturalized citizen. He has done everything right. He opened his own restaurant called the Himalayan Restaurant. Now there's 2 different restaurants. And he'd been accepted, his pictures on the back of the worship bulletin. He'd been accepted by the people in his community there in Plattsburgh. He even started a big cultural festival there in the town where people would celebrate Tibetan music and art. And they ended up building a beautiful mandala last summer in his honor there to kind of thank him for all he's done for the diversity. But after the election, he began to notice, he began to be assaulted. There's really no other way to describe it. The day after the election, he was going into the Walmart when a couple of men told him to get the F out of the country, called him a chink and threatened him. And then he just smiled and he kept going. And then there were a couple of other men who told him to get the F out of the country, get out of here, you chink. And then he went home and then he was just afraid. And then the next day he was driving, the same thing happened. And he became very, very afraid. And so he went on Facebook and he posted this thing to his community. And he talked about how frightened he had become and how it had really taken him to a new place. And he said, as fear overtakes me for the protection of my family and myself, I am now joining a group that believes in the right to own firearms. It is a sad decision for me as I believe in compassion. As a family man and human, I have faults, and it has driven me to the conclusion that a weapon of destruction is my only safeguard against the hate that has been directed against the color of my skin and political beliefs. He went on to talk about, as a peaceful Buddhist, how hard this was for him, but he felt his only choice was to get a shotgun and a license for a concealed carry pistol. It was a low, dark moment. But then he heard from friends on Facebook. I got around to thinking, and then my community members, of course, they've been very supportive of me. And I've had community members come up to me and say, Tenzin, we are behind you all the way. And when I look at that kind of support, then I do not feel the need to bear any kind of firearms, because that is my firearm. So instead of guns, he's bought a new security camera, and he's helping to organize a forum about racism and xenophobia. And the leaders have really, there's stories about how now, you can't get a seat in his restaurant because there's so many people crowded in there to eat and to support him. On Monday, his car was vandalized while it was parked outside his house. But he decided to fight back with compassion. In a Facebook post about the car, he wrote, "Bring it on. Your hate is not going to change me into you. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their swords into pruning hooks, and nation shall not make war against nation." Advent is this season when we are invited to pull out the best of ourselves, take the plastic sheets off that we put around ourselves to try to protect ourselves, and to just live with huge, big hearts, to go to the edge of the diving board, right, and just give it all we've got. So my season, my invitation to all of you is to surround yourself with the Muslim wisdom and the Buddhist Tenzin and all the good Christians you know who call you to live out your best self, so that on Christmas Eve, we really might be born anew with God's great gift to us. Amen.